Imagine handing your 18-year-old a backpack on their graduation day. Inside isn't a diploma or a set of dorm room keys. It is a brokerage account statement showing a balance of $734,000. Pure, liquid, S&P 500 index funds. Now, imagine the alternative. You spend that exact same amount of money over the previous 13 years on private school tuition, uniforms, and mandatory gala auctions. Your child walks away with a nice blazer and a solid education, but they start their adult life at zero. Or worse, they start with student loans because the private school drained the college fund. Today, we are going to look at one of the most emotionally charged financial decisions any parent will ever make. We are stripping away the prestige, the country club networking, and the parental guilt to look at the cold, hard mathematics of the private school versus index fund trade-off. I have spent the last week digging through decades of socioeconomic data and market history to answer a single, brutal question. Is a private K-12 education worth the nearly $750,000 opportunity cost? If you care about generational wealth, the answer might actually keep you up at night. We are going to run the numbers from kindergarten through retirement, and I promise you, the compounding effect of a $15,000 annual tuition payment is far more devastating than you think. Before we dive into the spreadsheets and the sociological studies, let us talk about why we are here. You are watching this because you want to make sure every dollar you earn is working as hard as you do. That makes you one of the few who actually thinks about the long game. If you find this kind of deep dive helpful, hitting the subscribe button is essentially the best return on investment you will get today. It is free, and it ensures you never miss a chance to optimize your net worth. Now, let us set the stage. Every year, millions of parents feel this intense pressure. They want the best for their kids, and our society has spent decades marketing the idea that a premium price tag on a school building equals a premium future for the child. We are using a baseline of $15,000 a year for our analysis. That is a middle-of-the-road figure for private tuition in the US. In big cities, you can easily double or triple that. But even at $15,000, we are looking at $250,000 in raw cash over the course of a child's school career. But as anyone who understands financial literacy knows, the raw cash is just the tip of the iceberg. The real cost is what that money could have become. The first mistake parents make is believing that $15,000 a year is a fixed, flat cost. It never is. In the world of private education, the tuition sticker price is just the cover charge to get into the building. Financial literacy demands we look at the hidden tax of the private school lifestyle. First, there is education inflation. While the general cost of living might go up by 2 or 3%, tuition historically climbs at 4 to 5% annually. If you start at $15,000 in kindergarten, by the time your kid is a senior, that bill is likely north of $25,000. Then there are the mandatory extras. I have noticed that private schools are basically non-stop fundraising machines. There are annual fund drives where you are pressured to give another couple thousand just to keep the lights on. There are the $500 uniforms that your kid outgrows in 6 months. There are the international field trips that costs $4,000 because the French club decided they absolutely must see the Louvre in person. When you add it all up, that $15,000 budget usually has a 20% overflow. You are not just paying for a teacher and a desk. You are paying for a social ecosystem that requires constant capital injections. We often call this the sunk cost. Once you are in, it is very hard to pull your kid out without feeling like a failure. But every dollar spent on a gala centerpiece is a dollar that isn't compounding in the market. Let us talk about the psychological trap here. Most parents view tuition as an investment. They tell themselves that by spending this money now, they are ensuring their child will earn more later. It is a hedge against a competitive world. But in accounting terms, tuition is not an investment. It is an expense. An investment is an asset that has a reasonable expectation of generating a future cash flow or appreciating in value. A tuition check is gone the moment it clears the bank. You cannot sell your child's third-grade education 10 years from now to pay for a house. You cannot borrow against the memory of a private school math class. When we treat expenses like investments, we lose our ability to calculate the true opportunity cost. If you take that same $15,000 and put it into a brokerage account, you own a piece of the 500 largest companies in America. That is an asset. It produces dividends. It grows while you sleep. By choosing the school, you are making a massive bet that the school will provide a higher return than the entire US economy. That is a very bold bet, and as we are about to see, the math suggests it is a losing one for most families. We need to stop looking at the blazer and start looking at the compound interest table, because the numbers are about to get very uncomfortable. If you think the raw cost of tuition is a problem, wait until you see the math of the lost decade. Most people look at 18 years of school and think about the $270,000 they spent. They think, okay, I can afford that over time. But that is the wrong way to think about it. The real damage isn't the money you spent, it is the wealth you prevented from existing. If you stop the video now, you might think you are just losing $250,000. But in the next few minutes, I am going to show you why that $15,000 a year is actually worth over $25 million by the time your child retires. We are moving from the cost of the school to the power of the alternative. We are going to look at the S&P 500 strategy and why the snowball effect turns a modest monthly contribution into a life-changing fortune. If you have ever wondered why the wealthy stay wealthy, this is the exact mechanism they use. And it doesn't involve a private school crest. Let us introduce our alternative, the low-cost S&P 500 Index Fund. For those who aren't familiar, this is the strategy pioneered by John Bogle at Vanguard. Instead of trying to pick the next Apple or Tesla, you just buy the whole market. You are betting on American ingenuity as a whole. Historically, the S&P 500 has returned about 10% annually over the last century. Even if we adjust for inflation and call it a 7 or 8% real return, it is the most effective wealth-building tool ever created for the average person. Now, imagine instead of writing a check to the private school registrar every month, you set up an automatic transfer of $1,250 into an index fund. That is $15,000 a year. You start this the day your child is born, and you keep it up until they turn 18. In the early years, it doesn't look like much. In year 1, you have $15,000 plus maybe $1,500 in growth. You might think, I would rather have the prestige of the fancy preschool for $1,500. But this is where people fail at financial literacy. They don't respect the tail end of the curve. Compounding is backloaded. It is like a snowball that starts the size of a marble. For the first few years, you are just pushing it through the snow. But by the time you reach the middle of high school, that snowball is 10 feet tall and moving under its own power. The interest starts earning more than your contributions. That is the moment you win the game. Let us look at the final tally. If you invest $15,000 a year for 18 years and earn a 10% return, your child turns 18 with an account balance of approximately $734,000. Let that sink in. You contributed $270,000 out of your own pocket. The market gave you $464,000 for free, just for being patient. Even if we use a more conservative 7% return to account for inflation, the balance is still over $550,000. This is the brutal ROI. By choosing the private school, you are essentially telling your child, I hope this school is so good that it makes you more than $700,000 more successful than you would have been otherwise. Because that is what you are giving up. An 18-year-old with $700,000 is in a completely different category of existence than an 18-year-old with a private school diploma and zero in the bank. They are not just ahead of the curve, they have bypassed the curve entirely. They can go to any college in the world debt-free and still have enough left over to buy a house in cash when they graduate. They have the ultimate luxury in life: options. They don't have to take a job they hate just to pay the rent. They have the freedom to take risks, start businesses, or travel. That is the power of the index fund protocol. Why don't more parents do this? It comes down to psychology. A $15,000 tuition bill feels like a necessary life expense, like a mortgage or groceries. We categorize it as an investment in our child's character. But an index fund contribution feels like a luxury or a secondary goal. We tell ourselves we will save for their future once the bills are paid. But here is the trick. The bills are never paid. The school will always find a new reason to ask for money. I have noticed that we are often more willing to spend money on things that other people can see. People can see the school your kid goes to. They can see the logo on the shirt. No one can see your brokerage account balance. We are trading long-term generational wealth for short-term social signaling. Financial literacy is about breaking that cycle. It is about realizing that $1,250 a month invested is a guaranteed path to a massive fortune, while $15,000 a year in tuition is a gamble on a curriculum that might not even matter in 10 years. If you can change your mindset to see that monthly contribution as the most important bill you pay, you are setting your child up for a life of freedom that no elite high school can guarantee. We have to stop being consumers of education and start being owners of capital. At this point, you might be thinking, but Tom, the private school gets them into Harvard, and Harvard graduates make millions more, so the tuition pays for itself, right? That is what the brochures want you to believe. But what if I told you that the data says the school almost doesn't matter at all? What if I told you that a kid who gets accepted to an Ivy League school but chooses to go to a cheap state university ends up making the exact same amount of money? We are about to look at some of the most famous studies in the history of educational economics. We are going to see why the private school premium is largely a statistical illusion. If you think you are buying your way into the elite, you might just be overpaying for an outcome your child was already going to achieve. We are going to look at the Brookings research and the Opportunity Insights data to see what actually drives success. Hint, it is not the name on the building. When you look at the raw data, private school students do better. They have higher SAT scores, better college placement, and higher starting salaries. But there is a massive logical error here called selection bias. Private school students overwhelmingly come from families with high income, stable households, and highly educated parents. When economists at the Brookings Institution and the National Bureau of Economic Research controlled for these factors, the private school advantage virtually disappeared. They found that a child from a wealthy, supportive home who attends a solid public school performs just as well as the same child in a $30,000 a year private academy. The success isn't coming from the school's secret sauce, it is coming from the home. You are already doing the heavy lifting by being an involved parent who cares about education. You are paying $15,000 a year for a result your child was already statistically guaranteed to get because of your zip code and your involvement. It is like buying a premium brand of salt. Salt is salt. You are paying for the fancy packaging, but the chemical composition is identical. In many cases, the top-tier public schools in good neighbourhoods have better facilities and more diverse course offerings than the local private school. You are already paying property taxes for that school. Why pay twice? The academic ROI of private school, for most families, is essentially zero when compared to a well-funded public alternative. You are chasing a ghost, and it is costing you $700,000. There is a famous study by Stacey Dale and Alan Kruger that every parent needs to know. They looked at students who were accepted into elite universities like Harvard or Yale, but chose to attend less selective, more affordable state schools. They tracked these students for decades to see who made more money. The result? There was no difference. The students who went to the state schools earned just as much as the Ivy Leaguers. The conclusion was clear. It is the person, not the institution. The traits that get you accepted into an elite school ambition, intelligence, work ethic, are the same traits that lead to success in the real world. Those traits don't disappear just because you didn't wear a private school uniform. If your child is driven and capable, they will thrive in a public high school, and they will thrive in a state college. By spending that $15,000 on tuition, you aren't making them more capable. You are just reducing the amount of capital they have to work with once their talent starts to pay off. I would much rather be a driven, smart graduate with a $700,000 head start than a driven, smart graduate with a prestigious name on my degree and an empty bank account. Success is an internal drive, not an external credential. We need to stop overestimating the impact of the school and underestimating the impact of the capital. Let us take this to the logical extreme. This is the part that truly illustrates the brutal ROI. Let us say your child turns 18 and they have that $734,000 in their index fund. Instead of spending it on a Ferrari or a mansion, they decide to let it sit. They go to a state school on a scholarship, get a decent job, and they never add another penny to that account. They just let it grow until they reach 65. If that account continues to earn its historical 8% average return for those 47 years, do you know what it becomes? Over $27 million. Even if we adjust for inflation and use a very conservative 5% real return, it is still over $7 million in today's purchasing power. By paying for private K-12 education, you are literally making a decision that costs your child tens of millions of dollars in future wealth. You are trading their status as a multi-millionaire at retirement for a slightly smaller class size in the 5th grade. When you frame it that way, the decision seems insane. We are talking about generational wealth. We are talking about the kind of money that changes a family's trajectory for a century. This is why financial literacy is so important. It allows you to see through the immediate emotional need to give your kid the best and see the long-term mathematical reality of what the best actually looks like. The best gift is not a private school education. It is the freedom from ever having to worry about money for the rest of their lives. Now, I am a realist. I know that sometimes public schools just aren't an option, or the emotional pull is too strong. If you are torn between the math and the feeling, there is a middle ground. I call it the public K-8 private high school strategy. During the elementary and middle school years, the school's impact on long-term success is at its lowest. This is when your influence as a parent matters most. If you send them to public school for those first 9 years and invest the $15,000 annually, you will have about $250,000 by the time they hit 9th grade. Then you can stop the investments and use the $15,000 a year for a high-end private high school. Your child gets the elite college counseling and the fancy networking when it actually matters for admissions. But here is the magic. That $250,000 you saved during the early years doesn't go away. It stays in the market. By the time they graduate high school, that fund has grown to over $350,000, even though you stopped contributing. You get the best of both worlds. Your child gets the private school experience for the finish line, and they still have a massive trust fund to start their life. It is about being strategic with your capital, rather than just dumping it into a 13-year sunk cost. You don't have to choose between their education and their wealth. You just have to be smarter than the marketing. If this level of analysis is how you think about your life, you are exactly the kind of person who should be in our community. We call ourselves the optimizers. We don't just follow conventional wisdom, we test it against the math. If you want to go deeper, I invite you to click the Join button below. It is a way to support the channel and get some extra perks, like priority replies in the comments so we can discuss your specific financial questions. Our members are the ones who help shape these videos by asking the hard questions that most people ignore. Now, before we wrap up, I want to address the real-world exceptions. If your child has special needs that a public school cannot meet, or if your local school is truly unsafe, then private school isn't a luxury, it is a necessity. Financial literacy isn't about being a miser, it is about allocating your limited resources to the things that provide the highest value. But for most of us living in decent school districts, the private school choice is an emotional one, not a logical one. Take a look at your budget today. Ask yourself if you are paying for your child's future or your own ego. The numbers don't lie. $700,000 at 18 is a life-changing event. A private school diploma is just a piece of paper. The choice is yours, but now you know the cost. I want to hear from you. Have you run these numbers for your own situation? Maybe you live in an area where the private school premium actually pays off. Or maybe you have seen the public school system work wonders for your family. Drop a comment below and let us do a bit of a peer review on this data. We are all here to learn from each other's experiences. My goal isn't to tell you how to parent. It is to make sure you have the data to parent with your eyes open. If you found this helpful, share it with a friend who is currently debating that tuition check. You might just save them $700,000. I am Tom, this is Tom Talks Money, and I will see you in the next one. Keep optimizing.